In this video, we'll do the materials for our cloth. So in the description, I should have a link to some resources that will have a cloth node groups.blend file. So you should download that first. Then you can go to File, Append. Then once you find it, go to it and go to the node tree and then just select everything and append that. So now let's go to the shading tab. So I'll go to my blanket here and select it and add a material, which I'll call blanket. And if I hit Shift A and go to group, you'll see that I have cloth wrinkles, fuzz pattern, and some weave patterns. So I can select one of these weave patterns, maybe the plain one. And if I add my texture coordinates, I'll use the UV coordinate, and I can press Ctrl H on my selected node and it will get rid of all of the sockets that aren't used. Okay, then I can connect it to my base color and scale it. Now how these work is they basically just use some vector math on the coordinates. So I'll grab a vector math node and I can use the length option, which I just pressed L to grab since I remember that's its shortcut there. And you see this kind of gradient coming out. And I can just use like a color ramp to adjust that. So I got this kind of round gradient coming out of the corner. So if I subtract 0.5, it goes into the negative coordinate range too, since it's just going to be a length from here. So it's going in a corner, but then I move it here, and now it's in the middle, if that kind of makes sense. So now you have the circle in the middle, and then I can use some more vector math. I can get a grid of several of these circles. So I do this by multiplying the amount and then using fraction so that it cuts off the whole number part. So it goes from 0 to 1 and then 0 to 1. With the fraction, it goes from 0 to 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, etc. But every time it goes up a whole number. So like once it gets to 1 or 2, it cuts that off. So you have a range of going to from 0 to just below 1 or 0 to just below -1. And I can scale this up higher and get many of these circles. And if I adjust it, you can see if I adjust just one, you get a shape that's more of an oval. And I can use this kind of stuff to create these patterns. So if I look at my plain weave pattern, inside it I have this plain threads that I have 2 of that I combine. So those are each one direction. So with one of my plain threads, I get the pattern going one way. And then in my plain weave pattern, I have 2 of them. And I have this thing where I swap the X and Y to get it basically rotated 90 degrees. And then I use this maximum to combine them. And that's how I get this pattern. There's other videos that can go into more detail on procedural materials in Blender and procedural patterns such as this thread. So you should check out like procedural cloth pattern in YouTube to see more that go into depth. And you can take a look inside these patterns and see if you can figure out some of that by looking at it. So with these procedural textures, if you scale them and have them have very high detail, such as a very fine cloth like a sheet, you'll start seeing like noise patterns start to come where there'll be like banding and stuff, and it doesn't look the greatest. And that's because each pixel can be completely different and it doesn't just really blend it together. So you could either use like a camera data and use like this view distance to mix in and out this pattern. Or for a finer cloth like your sheets, you can just not have this high detail pattern. But this will be kind of a woven cloth that'll have bigger threads that you could more likely see at a distance. So maybe something like that. So now with this pattern, I can use like a mix RGB to add in the color. So this should be in the factor, not the color. And then I can maybe have like a dark red for the shadows and a brighter red for the main parts. Next, the roughness will need to be higher, so I'm just going to turn that up for a second, and then we'll add some more detail there. You can add a sheen, which is meant for cloths. And it's kind of like from the fuzz picking up light that it creates this. And then you can also use a bump node to take that height and add it into the normal. And that's obviously way too much, so let's turn that down and just add a little bit of height detail there. So we can use maybe another mix RGB. That can be the roughness. I'll probably want the tops to be a little bit smoother, so I'm going to have them be less rough, so I'll turn them down a little bit and have the bottoms maybe fully rough. And I'll plug that into the roughness. Maybe I'll have a little bit more, or maybe turn that down a little bit. And just adjust it until it seems about right to you. Now in real life, things aren't going to be perfect, so there's going to be some variation. So I'm going to add a noise texturing. And I might as well add two, and I'll just connect these real quick. And I'll have one that'll be my big details, and I'll hit Control-Shift-Click with the Node Wrangler to view it. And maybe I'll have it something like 6. And then I'll have a smaller detail one that I'll scale up. Maybe something like that. And then I can use a mix RGB to combine these. And then I can use this factor to say how much of each I want. Maybe something like that. And now I can do a few things with this. One is that the cloth pattern would normally not be so perfectly aligned. So I can add some distortion to that. So what you want to do is get a mix RGB. And you're going to mix the noise with the UV coordinates to adjust where everything is a little bit. So you can use add and plug the color of your noise in. And it'd be better to actually use the color, since then you have more directions, since you have R, G, and B, like X, Y, and Z. So I'm going to use those instead of the factor for this one. And I will plug that into the color. And as you can see, this is a lot of distortion, so you're going to have to turn this way down to a very low value, like 0.01 or something. That adds just a little bit. And now instead of add, if you wanted to also go in the negative direction, you'd want to basically scale it to be twice the amount and then subtract it by 1, right? So then you have a range of -1 to 1. Now you can do that, or you can use this linear light operation, which will just do that by default. And now you have a little bit of it going in both directions, and now it's basically twice as strong because of that, so I might turn that down even more. So now we have a little bit of distortion in there. And you can also plug that noise with the black and white one into our color, so we can add another mix RGB. And I will plug this into the top, and then maybe use multiply to have it slightly darken some areas. And I'll plug that into the base color. And then you can adjust this to see how much it adds. And you just want kind of a little bit. So maybe the default factor of around 0.5 would be good, since the noise isn't actually that strong in Blender. It kind of just goes from white to light gray. And then of course you might want to add some of that into your roughness as well. Now it could be good to use a different noise texture, but for performance reasons I will use the same one that I did before. And plug that into factor. And maybe I'll have this plug into the darker, rougher area. And I'll just leave the lower areas of the cloth to only be rough. And then I can have some range in the top areas. So I'll brighten that up. And then I'll have some that's brighter and some that's a bit darker. And then I have some variation in the roughness as well. You can also add like a little bit of wrinkles that are just smaller detail ones by adding another bump layer. So I add a group. I have cloth wrinkles here. And I need to plug that into the UVs as well. And this just kind of, if I scale this up, it's just got some noise that is 2 levels, and then they're kind of adjusted, and then they're combined with a smooth maximum. So I can plug this into another bump node, put that into the height, and then put that bump into the normal of the other bump node. Then you'll have some smaller wrinkles, so I can adjust the scale and strength of it. I'm going to make this really low since I think a thicker one wouldn't really have that much. So that just adds a little extra variation that can make it look nice. So now we can do the similar stuff on the sheets. So I'll add a sheets material. And I'm just going to go ahead and isolate the view because I'm getting a little bit of lag. Now the sheets, like I said, have a very fine threads normally, so you wouldn't really be able to see it at a distance unless you're like looking up really close. So I'm not going to include those here. So I'm just going to have some of those noise textures again and add just some very little variation in the color. I'll get my coordinate node, plug in the UV here and press Ctrl H to hide all the other sockets. And then I can use the mix RGB and combine these two. And then I can adjust how much of each I see. I probably want it to be, I don't know, I'll keep it around at 0.5 again. And then I can use this as the factor of my base color. And I'll bring this to white. And now we got just a little bit of variation in the color. I can have another one of these. That can be my roughness. Then maybe I might add a little bit more. And it's not going to go through this full range since the noise textures in Blender don't really get that dark or that bright. They kind of go from a bright gray to a dark gray. So that looks okay. And then we can just add another cloth wrinkles group. I'll put this in the coordinates and plug a bump node in to that. Normal. And then I can just adjust the scale and strength. Now sheets, since they're finer, tend to have a lot of little wrinkles. Maybe I will have the small scale details be a bit more frequent, and then make the overall bigger. Turn on the strength. And you can play with these settings to try to get it just how you think is right. So maybe I'll unisolate it and take a look. And I'll use this same material on the bed mattress, but I'm going to duplicate it and call it like mattress. Probably didn't spell that right. And I'm going to use, instead of the UV, I'm going to use the object. So I can hold control and I can drag all of these at the same time and put into object. And then this will wrap it all around in world space because I forgot to fix the UVs on this one. And you can plug the sheets into the pillows. Now, maybe these cushions might have a different color. Maybe they'll be like yellow or something. Let's try and match these colors a little better. Should probably be less saturated. And all of these need their UVs to be adjusted. Now, these ones I messed up the UVs. It's kind of distorted on the sides here because I forgot about bevels don't work the greatest with UVs. So what I can do is, if I isolate this, I can fix these by going into here. I'll turn off the subdivision at first, and I can just go ahead and select the entire top. If I can figure out what that is exactly. And I can hit Control Shift click to select the top. I can hit Control plus to grow the selection. So hopefully I have the whole top. Then I can Shift select twice to make this one the active one, and I can use U, follow active quads, and those will make a nice even unwrapping. And if it's not perfectly even, you can use the text tools or UV squares options to make them a square grid, or to grid by shape in UV squares, or text tools, UV layout, rectify will do the trick. So you'll probably want to install those add-ons anyway, since they add a lot of good functionality for UV unwrapping. And then you can do that on the other side and hopefully get them fixed up. And I'll turn the subdivision back on, and I'll go back to the layout tab. And I should have those. Now for these, I want the UVs to be smaller so they have less of the wrinkles going on here too. Oops. Unisolate and make these smaller and have less of those wrinkles that are plaguing them. For the sheets, since they use the same material. Now, particularly on the cushions, I think it looks like they have too much bump. I'll turn that down a bit. Now, if I go into render view, I can see that the strength of the wrinkles is actually probably too high. So I'll have to play with those. Something like that. So I'm going to use one of these curtains, maybe this one. I'll move this one out of the way. And then I'll select each of these. And then I'll duplicate it, move it over here. Then I'm going to use the blanket material as a base, but I'll press this little 2 to make it unique and call it curtains. So maybe for this one, I'll make it more of a blue. So I'll go with a dark blue over here. If I go to render view, you can see what it looks like. I think for these darker ones, it might help if it's got a little bit more smoothness so it can have some more reflections going on. So I'll make the roughness turn down a little bit. Now you may want to have some subsurface scattering since these can have the light going in through the windows. So I can go into my options, turn on subsurface translucency if we're in Eevee. Now I should note that if you're using cycles to render your cloth, you're going to need to have it have some thickness using like a solidify modifier if you want to be able to use subsurface scattering, since it only works on meshes that have thickness in cycles. And then in Eevee it kind of just assumes that you have like a very thin mesh when you don't have any actual thickness. So I can turn on subsurface, and that's going to cause it to recompile the shaders. So first I'll need the color from the base color to be my subsurface color, as those I believe should probably always be the same. As this is just the base color for your subsurface material, and then the subsurface radius can affect what the color of the light coming through is. So as you see here, it has the red highest, as that's more good for like skins where you might have like the ears having light go through it and it looks like it's glowing red. So that's why you have this radius having more of the red light going through. But the subsurface color, I believe, should always be the same as the base color. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. Now I might want to have more of this subsurface going in through based on the cloth. So I might go ahead and drag the height into a mix. So I think I might want to have this be kind of gray where it's actually in the threads, and then have it be much brighter in between the threads where more light I think would shine through. So I can go and plug that into subsurface. And then of course I can tweak these. I don't think there would really be that much showing up through these curtains since it's nighttime. And these are kind of somewhat thicker curtains. So now we have something like this. I'm going to maybe move this over a little as it seems too far. If you like this video, please like and subscribe to see more videos like this. And if you haven't seen the rest of the videos in the series, you should go and check the playlist in the description. Thank you.